You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we're joined by Rose Griffin, a speech-language pathologist and board-certified behavior analyst with over 20 years of experience. In her last visit, we explored how speech and ABA therapy work together. Be sure to check out that episode, which we'll link to this one. But today, Rose will share practical speech therapy strategies for autistic children, the importance of joint attention, and how families can support communication growth. Welcome back to the podcast, Rose Griffin.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be back.
Well, it's been quite a while. I believe when we were chatting, it's 4 to 5 years almost since we were able to have our last conversation about the need and about the value of collaborating across disciplines. But maybe you can catch us up a little bit and give us a little bit of an update of where your work has taken you since our last conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I have started a membership now called the ABA Speech Connection, where we offer CEUs for speech therapists, BCBs, and soon to be RBTs. Will also need their CEUs. So focused on communication as the foundation and also that collaboration piece. That's really so important. And like other CEU memberships, it's not just like a watch and learn. It's, you can do an onboarding call with me. So I have a community sense and support because the work that we do is so important. I want to help people feel really confident that they're reaching their students and that they're in a professional community of like-minded individuals. And so that's something that I'm really proud of. And actually my business has grown a lot, Jeff. And so I am just full-time at ABA Speech. Before I was kind of dividing my time between ABA Speech and being a practitioner. So now I'm just focusing on ABA Speech because I cannot do everything, which is a good problem to have.
Well, I'd love for you just to kind of take a minute and talk to the audience about what drove you into really exploring that need of collaboration, that need of being able to empower behavior analysts to be a part of that conversation with speech pathologists, to be able to build out a great program and have families be a part of everything that's going on. But what led that passion? Because not everybody's doing it, and not everybody has been talking about it as much as you have.
Yes, that is true. That is very true. So I took a position my second year as a speech therapist at the Learner School, which is part of the Cleveland Clinic. And in that role, I was a speech therapist, solely a speech therapist way back when, and I was working in collaboration with BCBAs. And I will never forget, it was a non-public program. So it was where kids were coming. It was a least restrictive environment. And most of them, 99.9%, engaged in very unsafe problem behavior. That was a barrier to their learning. And it was mostly students who were older, who were in a district where they could not reach the child with traditional methods of speech therapy. And so it just snowballed into the student not being able to communicate, navigating their environment with very unsafe problem behavior. And then they would come to the learner school. And so I really loved being able to support students who are hard to reach. And once you show that is your entire caseload. So I just always took positions where I was working with kids who had severe to profound autism or kids who had very unsafe problem behavior. Loved learning about putting ABA and speech together to see how it literally transforms people's lives. That was over 20 years ago. And then I became a BCBA. And once I became dually certified, I knew there were not a lot of people doing both. And so I just couldn't shut up about it. So you're right. I disseminate on LinkedIn, social media. I do a lot of different webinars and trainings and have my own podcast as well too.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot going on, but at the same time, these are all valuable venues for BCBAs and families alike to be able to learn. We're going to pivot from what we talked about last time, because last time we were talking very clinician driven, and we're going to talk a little bit more about practical strategies for parents on being able to help promote communication and promote the ability for their child to be able to get their needs met and to be able to have more say in what's important to their life and being able to drive some of that need that's occurring. But give us a little bit of a picture, because the toolbox for a parent, it's not something that everybody knows exactly what they should be doing or knows exactly the blueprint on how to work through it. But there are some core features. What are those key practical strategies that parents can talk about when they're building communication skills?
I think the key practical strategies are just realizing that communication happens all day, across the day. And that one thing that I have found from doing a lot of in-home services for families is that we really should be thinking about how we can set an environment for communication with a lot of modeling. The thing that people really get into the trap of doing is asking a lot of questions. Parents love to bombard their kid with questions because if you don't learn that that's really difficult for a student, especially an autistic learner who's not yet speaking or is an emerging communicator, that's exactly what we should not be doing. So I have this three-pronged approach talking about joint attention where it kind of goes across the day of like using books, music, and play to model language, to make language fun. And, some of the talks, I have a talk I do called The Power of Joint Attention, which I love that talk. One of my colleagues said it's my favorite talk because I've probably done it like 30 or 40 times, but it says communication happens everywhere. So I have a video I use my own kids. They are typically developing. One has ADHD, but doesn't have language delays. And in the car, I have a video of my daughter, my middle daughter, and we're singing a song together and doing little hand gestures. She starts doing a little dance. And that seems so simple. But for those of us in the field know that's huge. It's imitation. It's social reciprocity. These are the times, car rides, bath time, snack time, and it's not undemanding that you use your language or you don't get your thing. It's not that at all. It's just like, hey, we're going to be in this together. We can have fun in the car. We can sing songs at bath. And that is communication. And that's really what parents should focus on. And there's a lot of information out there. There's just like too much information out there. So just engaging with your child and modeling communication and narrating about your day. That's another great strategy. Just, oh, mommy's going to fold the laundry and oh, daddy's doing the dishes and, wash, wash, wash. It seems silly if you're not in our field, but this is how communication happens. And this is how we build that foundation.
Well, let's hover over that idea of joint attention because I think it hits those key components. It is communicating all day, is that we're always engaging if we want to be a partner in a communication experience, is that we're engaging in joint attention. It's always something that's being triggered throughout the day. But let's talk about it because you mentioned that it can occur in the car. It can occur during bath time. It can occur while somebody is having a meal. I mean, it could occur at every aspect of the day, but what does it actually look like? And how can a parent take a mealtime experience and turn that into an opportunity to be able to build on the development of joint attention skills?
Right. It's really this coordinating attention between a social partner and an event in the environment. And so you can make mealtime lots of fun. You just like sing little songs and make it fun. Or sometimes kids, if they're really little, can be by you while you're making dinner, preparing, or whatever that looks like in your family. And so I think it's this idea of how you can use language enriched strategies throughout those very functional routines. You don't have to, you can narrate your day, but the idea is we want to not bombard kids with questions. I think that that's something that a lot of clinicians and parents really struggle with. I remember I was seeing a kid in his home. He was getting ABA, OT, and I was going in for speech therapy. And the parents were super smart. They were computer people and, worked from home so they could see all my sessions. And they just couldn't believe that I could run this whole session and not like bombard with questions because the child wasn't there yet. So we were working on a book and we were doing Pete the Cat. And, I was making it fun by using character voices and we were singing Wheels on the Bus and I was doing motions because sometimes the kids are not able to verbalize and maybe they never will verbalize, but it doesn't mean that they can't participate in this socially engaging an activity. And I think once kids understand that there are so many ways to show that a child is communicating that don't include verbalizing it first, that's where the power's unlocked. And we have a whole different way of thinking. And I think sometimes when we're in the field for so long, even with parent training, it's like we don't understand how much we know and like what we're thinking about a situation. We're here, I'm in this people's home. They're very educated people, but they are completely floored by how I'm getting their child to engage in a very naturalistic type of way. And I think that we really hold this power of sharing those strategies with parents. And then, what's cool about parent training and ABA, because as a speech therapist, you don't always have that guaranteed time with parents, is you can really make that time what you want, right? You can kind of check back in, give parents one thing to do, not a bunch. I have 3 kids of my own, so it's like a month goes by and that seems like a lot of time, but not when you're parenting and working and all the things. So I think that's just keeping it like the expectation that you're going to work on one strategy and start to implement it into your daily routines.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the fact that communication comes across in a variety of different forms, because oftentimes when we're talking communication, the immediate thought process is going to, well, communication is talking back and forth. And that's probably where families are defaulting to, well, I have to ask them questions. I have to provoke that. I have to try and incite more of that back and forth. The only way I know how to do that is to ask a question, to get a vocal response. The joint attention piece, how much does really understanding the motivation and the interest of your child play into that? Because that seems like something that families already have in their tool belt. Is they know their child, they know how to get engaged, they know which things that child's going to want to be a part of. So where does motivation fit into this train of thought for a family?
Oh yeah, I think that's huge. And knowing what your child likes and trying to utilize that, but also using new, exciting, and some of the research literature, it says like respond to a fun event. And I always joke when I'm doing that training, because it's like there's, a couple of us on the call and it's like what I think is fun, you may not think is fun, just like our kids. Everything's different. And what was fun on Tuesday may not be fun on Thursday because maybe they did that thing 700 times when they were at school. So I think it's like the novelty of things and just trying new things. That's why it's nice to have these partners, whether your child's getting speech and ABA or RBTs, because they can give us these ideas that inform what we may be doing in our household environments with our kids as far as communication opportunities.
And that team effort that you were talking about, I would imagine that also plays into understanding how to be able to progress some of the skill sets of after you're able to kind of attain some of the joint attention, but how can you mix? How can you intersperse all these varieties of communication skills? So as a speech therapist and a behavior analyst, is that how do you keep the family apprised of ways that they can incorporate all of the skills that you're working on, but not feel like I am just another clinician for my child? That seems like a juggling act.
Yes, yes. I mean, what I tried to do when I was seeing clients in their home was have one skill that we would work on across the month. I think one thing to think about across the month is great. It's harder when a student gets ABA in one center and a speech therapist maybe in a different center. So I always say we should try to coordinate care, because even some clinics that say we offer speech and OT and ABA, if people are not talking outside of those therapy sessions, it might look like they're offering all those services. But if they're not coordinated, if the care is not coordinated, it can be confusing, right? It can be overwhelming for the parent. It can be confusing for the child. And when we're confused as parents, I know when I'm confused as a small business owner, it's just like I can't move. I can't do the next step. I can't do the next thing. So we don't want to do that to our parents. So I think it's good to know all the cooks in the kitchen and trying to get everybody on the same rhythm of how we're sharing with parents, because we definitely don't want to overwhelm parents. And I don't have an autistic child of my own, but I have a lot of friends who do. And I have my own podcast where I talk to people, and people have a lot on their plate. So if we could streamline that coordination of care and those ideas, I think that's good. And just reinforcing and encouraging trying these things at home, because sometimes it's hard just to get started.
Yeah, I mean, so what is that true benefit? And so when you're talking about the setup of any sort of treatment and having multiple parties that are involved, is the benefit of making sure that collaboration, is it that everybody does the same thing in the exact same way, or is it more that they're getting that overarching idea and goal and generating ways to be able to incorporate that into the child's life so that they're meeting the child at their developmental level. Like, where's the real benefit of that collaboration piece?
Yeah, I mean, the real benefit really drove home to me. I was talking to ABA clinic owner out of Scottsdale, and he's also an autism parent. And him and his wife they're not BCBAs, they're not, but they started a clinic because one of their children was diagnosed as autistic, and they were in a different part of the United States, and they were getting interdisciplinary care. So they had speech, they had OT, their child was not making any progress and they just couldn't figure it out. But once they got into the inner workings of how those services actually looked, it was not coordinated. It wasn't coordinated care. And so the parents felt frustrated because progress was limited. And the child felt frustrated because they were at that point where they were like not yet a verbal communicator, but they were trying to use a device, but people couldn't get on board with AAC. AAC is a whole thing. So this person had a really great business background. I could tell when I got on the call. And what they did is they started their own center. And so they have speech therapists, they have OT, they have speech all in-house. And they're really focused on having some coordinated training time and having some coordinated assessment time and intervention planning. And I think that that's obviously the ideal for everybody. Not everybody's operating that situation. But if you are getting services from different spots, I think it's great at a baseline that people know that the other providers exist and they can at least talk once or twice a year to talk about progress and intervention, because we're all busy, but it's like we're all trying to work towards the same goal, to increase communication. But if it's not a joint effort, it just feels confusing and disjointed.
Absolutely. And I mean, if everybody's operating in silos, it's what are you really doing for the child unless everybody is able to work as a team?
Yes.
So as a family, I'm just kind of putting a picture out there right now that oftentimes when communication challenges are really interfering with a child's life in their home environment, is that the family is going to do whatever they can do to get by. And sometimes that's stifling communication growth in order for them just to be able to live the day and to get through things. So in a situation like this, is that you have the chance right now to be a collaborator amongst yourself because you wear a behavior analyst hat and a speech pathologist hat and a parent training hat. I mean, you have everything going on. So what is your suggestion in a situation like that when you have a family that's overwhelmed by communication challenges that are increasing behavioral challenges and it's causing that disruption in their home environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think AAC is the big one. You know, when I was on the Behavioral Observations podcast, Matt said, what is one thing that you really wish that we had in our coursework and training as BCBAs? And now I have two answers. It's speech and language milestones in development. I feel like that's not really touched on enough. And also AAC devices, because through my membership in the ABA Speech Connection, I talk with all different types of people every single week. I do an onboarding call with all new members. And the one thing that comes up is AAC. So a very young learner may get access to ABA first just because of funding, maybe because the wait list for speech therapy is like 2 years in a rural area. You know, I hear all the different, traumatic stories. And BCBAs need to have some type of training in AAC. And I think that that's really, we have an intro to AAC course, AAC assessment, AAC funding that are all ACE courses, because I really think we cannot wait for a speech language pathologist to steer the ship on that. It's great if you're in an area where you can do it that way and the BCBA can gather data and help to inform things. But sometimes we are seeing the child first as a BCBA because of unsafe problem behavior. And so communication needs to start it needed to start yesterday, right? It needed to start 10 years ago for the kids that I was seeing in non-public programs. And we really need to get started now. So I think just having that, not being afraid of AAC and just knowing that it can help and that we can use it for lots of different communication modalities, not just for requesting, that it can be used for joint attention and commenting and things like that. So I think the power of AAC is just really important for parents and for all of us to really understand.
And that's something that behavior analysts oftentimes in great intentions try and learn on their own. And instead of relying on being educated by somebody who's a specialist in utilizing tools, in deciding which tool is the best one for this child. Like there's so many component pieces to that that then empower the ability to communicate. Is that something that should be starting on day one when you have a child who's completely overwhelmed by the inability to interact with their world because the world isn't communicating the way that they need it to? Should that be starting in the very beginning of treatment then?
I think so. Absolutely. And you're right. I think it's hard because we do want to give students, empower them with devices. But, I got an email this morning that was like, hey, I'm a speech therapist in such and such, and we're having a hard time dealing with an ABA provider because they created a folder that said ABA, and then they put all the icons that are needed for ABA. And it's like, oh, that's not how AAC works. It's a motor plan and it's complicated. And the RBT said we should never model, and we don't do that in ABA. And I was like, whoa, let's unpack this. We have to be professional and collaborative. And I'm like, but have you ever had a meeting with those people? Is this the first touch point, right? Because that's like, we need to increase the collaboration because all those things are not the best things to do. But we're all learning, we're all growing, and people, I really believe, think that they are doing what is best. We all want to help. We just don't think that other people always need to be included. But AAC is one of those critical times because I always say, like, okay, let's say we're doing manding and we have a kid that likes 5 things, and then we're just doing manding trials because nothing else is real. Everything else is really hard for the kid. Well, then it's too much. It's like, okay, I'm not asking for that 5th thing. Now I just have 4 things that I like. Kids like this, right? And it's like we have to be very careful. It's a delicate balance. So that's what we try to do at ABA Speech, is to have a lot of courses about AAC, usually put on by like a duly certified person. But one of my favorite people, Dr. Cindy Gavarder, is a BCBAD out of New Mexico who has a lab about AAC, and she publishes a ton of research and presents on it. And I'm like, she's a BCBA, you know what I mean? So you never know who knows what. Yeah.
And I would imagine that also when you're, regardless of the style that somebody communicates, whether that's through AAC, sign language, vocal speech, gesture, whatever it may be, is that the only way that somebody could really become, I guess, their authentic self is that they learn not just to be a respondent, not just to be able to give the correct answer all the time, but instead to be able to express themselves. So how does a speech therapist, how does a behavior analyst that's working with a speech therapist, how do they help somebody to become their authentic self, to be able to share their experience rather than tell you what you think their experience should be?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And, it really came full circle to me. I presented at FABA last year for the first, I live in Ohio, so I went down to FABA and I presented about SLP BCBA collaboration. And somebody came up to me after my talk and said, I worked with a really wonderful SLP, and she made me realize that I could model on my student's AAC device, and that the AAC device doesn't just have to be used for programming. I feel like that's what we say in ABA for data points, that it can actually be used for other times. But, it can be used for NDBI, naturalistic interventions, play. These are the times that we could show a student, oh, look, there's a ball. Not because we're doing a man trial for ball or requesting, but like we're just saying like, oh, ball, or, what a car, whatever it is that we really can use the device and model. We can have our own iPad with Prolo Quota Go or whatever your student is using, and we can use our device, and should, outside of those traditional kind of discrete trial times, which is fine because that's a big part of what we do and how we teach students. But I think play and more naturalistic interventions, we as BCBAs get really anxious about how to take data during those times. And I'm actually going to have Dr. Tracy Ralston on to talk about this article she did about how do we take data as BCBAs during these times of play, because it's important, and we know it's important, but it's a little bit out of our comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that when you mentioned the Prolo Quota Go, but when I think of the ability for a child to go from environment to environment, maintaining their ability to communicate, which means that sometimes it's the device, sometimes it's the knowledge of how this child's communicating is probably the most important thing. I would hate it if somebody were to take my voice box out and not allow me to take it to every single environment that I'm in, because I would have no way to be able to express myself, my needs, being able to communicate. So, but this is a problem families have. It's getting everybody on the same page and advocating that, hey, you know what, this is happening in speech and home. How do I make sure that you are supporting my child in the same way in a school or vice versa in the community? So how do autistic individuals, how do family members of autistic individuals advocate to make sure that they're not being limited based off of a policy,
Right.
to make sure that, hey, you know, my voice travels with me. I get to have this everywhere. How do you make sure that that's happening? How do you coach families to advocate for themselves?
I'm so glad you asked, because there is this resource that I feel like would be new to you and new to a lot of people, even speech therapists. It's called the Communication Bill of Rights. It's completely free. And I actually was able to see at the ASHA Awards last year for speech therapists, I saw the person get a Lifetime Achievement Award that helped to create it. And I was like, wow, this is cool. It is a free resource. It's called Communication Bill of Rights. And it just says, just like you said, this learner should have access to their device because this is their voice. They should be able to talk to people. They should be able to protest. They should be able to do this, that, and the other. And I always urge people when I'm doing trainings on AAC to print this resource out and share it, right, as an antecedent kind of intervention, not when we feel threatened because somebody didn't take the AAC device out of the backpack or they didn't take it to gym because they don't need it and we don't want to break it. And, you know, we really have to start sharing this now before there's a problem, because I know that, you know, there's always going to be a problem. We're humans, right? We're always going to have a difference of opinion or something. So the Communication Bill of Rights really empowers you. And it's not just the parent saying like, well, they have to do this, and it gets really contentious. It's saying like, hey, you know, I was on a training with so-and-so and they talked about this resource. I think this would be great. Can we put this up in the classroom? Can we put this in the work area? Whatever it is. And I think when we come back to this culture of support that's based on science and based on research and just good, kind-hearted, compassionate care, and it's not a he said, she said, and we can always go back to that resource. And that is a really nice thing that I train parents and staff members on, because it's not one word against the other. It's going back to a resource, which I think has a lot of power, and a visual.
So, I mean, families obviously have not spent as much time learning about all these resources and being able to take the advantage of having so many colleagues who can help to kind of build a knowledge base over time. Can you share how the ABA Speech Connection and your CEU membership can support both professionals, because professionals don't always have all these tools, but also families. So, I mean, we're talking everything from other SLPs to BCBAs to RBTs to family members. How do you go about, and can you share your path on being able to give them those tools?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm so proud of is that every single person in the ABA Speech Connection gets an onboarding call with me, not a team member. So I think that's really nice. I love being able to connect with people because people find my information as a parent, as a grandparent, as a BCBA, as a speech therapist. There's always a way to me, usually around collaboration or a student who's not yet speaking. And so I love doing onboarding calls with each single person that signs up because I love having that touch point. And I feel like once I've met somebody virtually, I'm like, you know, if I see you at a conference someday, it's like, we're friends, right? I've seen you, I've met you. Just like, and we offer live courses and we also offer a CU library. So we have live courses every single month. Some people are like, Rose, if you didn't have live courses, like I wouldn't be a member because I cannot pay attention to a self-paced course. And then other people are like, I'm working every day, you know? So we have over 50 hours of content. And it's really what I'm trying to do, Jeff, is create a curated professional development experience. So it's not just anybody off the street who has those 4 letters or 3 letters that can do a training for us. It's me finding you somewhere or you coming across my desk, me reaching out and saying, hey, you'd be a great fit for the connection. And all of our courses are based on community needs. So AAC, joint attention, anxiety, severe problem behavior, you name it. If it's a need of the community, we will address it in a CEU course.
I think that's amazing. And I would imagine it's not a one time you get all the information and it's over. It's something that people should be returning to, is that the knowledge within our field constantly is growing, it's changing, it's adapting. What's the importance of folks continuing to educate themselves on all of these based off of the science and the research that's coming out?
Well, that's right. There's always new research coming out. That's what's so exciting. And so I, as a clinician, know that it's hard to access that research. So most of the people that are on my podcast that are speakers in the connection, I have read an article that they did. And so we try to really bridge that gap between what is research, but really what is clinically focused and how we can take that research and transform your practice. So it's all actionable tips and strategies, and really that community of support, because there's a lot of people who offer CEUs, but we try to have that community of support where you can ask questions, do an onboarding call, because the work that we do is so very important. And it's nice to feel that we're doing a great job at it, but that we also have support.
Yeah, and right now you have a chance to be able to talk to the professional group, the families. When you do have that opportunity to have somebody in front of you and to be able to talk directly to them, what is it that you're hoping that they're pulling from that initial conversation, or from just some of the information that you can give them on the macro level, the larger scale?
Absolutely, that they can make a difference. I think people in our field really want to help, and they always feel like they're not doing enough. And so if I can help people understand that they are doing a great job, and to help them feel really comfortable having that talk with the teacher about using the AADC device in the classroom, or having that talk with the speech therapist about utilizing a strategy that's evidence-based versus one that's not, really just empowering people and giving them confidence to take something that they've learned and utilize it in practice. Because I've been to a bunch of conferences. I love going to conferences. You learn things, but then after you unpack, you get your work emails situated, the fact that you actually do something that you learned in therapy is pretty slim. So we try to be coaches and supporters, and we know that you can do it.
Rose, once again, I feel like I've learned so much in just a small chunk of time. Can you share with us one more time, just where people can go directly, what the website is, how people can find you so that they can potentially continue the journey of learning and educating themselves?
Yeah, visit me at abaspeech.org, and you can learn all about the ABA Speech Connection, which is our membership. And if you ask me a question there, we will respond.
Well, thank you again for joining us, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back on. Maybe not a 4-year time gap between the next time, because it's always a joy. Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.